Alright, what is up YouTube? So today I'm going to be showcasing the best generic extra deck monsters of 2021. I'm going to be showcasing a kind of tier list format, just showcasing a wide variety of different things rather than having like a top 10 of like the best generic extra deck monsters, because I feel like this is more informative. It kind of gives you much more options and kind of gives you everything for every type of deck. So let's get started with Ravenous. I think Ravenous is just outclassed. Like if you want something that is like undestructible, something like Dragoon is just better, or having the Bls Link is just somewhat better. Like having this card in your deck is just honestly kind of worthless. And something like Bls Sword is just better for the other effect to kind of get over monsters. So in every way, this card is just not really that good. It's a good card, but it just gets outclassed. Fucho, the level 1 XYZ that has protection. This card is very good, but it's only used in Drytron. It's just not generic enough. There's not many level 1 monsters that you want to really XYZ with. So having this card, it's really good, but it's only really for Zeus, which is going to be like one of the best cards in this, category or in this tier list. Bls Sword, definitely very good, but it got a little bit outclassed with something like Access Code. Access Code is just way better than something like Bls Sword, because Bls Sword takes 3 monsters and Access Code takes 2. Access Code deals with multiple of different cards. Bls Sword only OTK. It's only good for OTKing, but Access Code has a lot more utility. Next up, IP Masquerena. It's a very good card, just not quite good enough. If you look at the format, there's not many decks that are, ending on Link monsters. There's like Adamancive Haters, there's Drytron, and then maybe like the Bird Up deck. Besides that, like Eldritch is not really going into the extra deck. Zodiac is only making XYZs. Virtual Rose is only making XYZs in, Sync Rose, and then you have PKs that's only really going for Verte and Rusty Bardiche. Otherwise they're just making XYZs. So like IP Masquerena, definitely a very solid card for not only linking up into other monsters but for the protection, but again, it's just not good enough. Unchained Abomination, it gets outclassed by Apollousa. Apollousa is just way better than something like Unchained Abomination. The only real deck you're really playing this in is like Unchained itself, obviously. Maybe Dragon Link, and then maybe like Live Twins, but for the most part, it just really gets outclassed. Like this card is just not really. I mean, it's a really good card. It's just like you rather just make like Apollousa. Chaos Ruler, I think this is really good. It's just not quite generic enough, and it's just not really good enough to be like insanely great in generic. So it is really good in something like Orcus and Dragon Link and Eldritch, where you want to send these cards to the graveyard. You have multiple lights and darks, so you can get this back on the field. And being able to add those, light and darks from your decks, from your, pile back into the hand, it's just really solid. And setting up your graveyard is just like really good in 2021. So Chaos Ruler, definitely very good, very solid, but just not generic enough and not quite as strong enough for today's format to be like insanely great. It is definitely a great card, just not insane. Titanclad, it's just like, it's not generic enough, but still good. You're only really playing this for decks that play Dogmatica Punishment to send it to the graveyard, and then during the end phase, you can add like an Ecclesia or a Fleur-de-Lis or a Maximus, whatever the case may be. Titanclad is just really solid as just a very good target to send off a punishment. And that's really it. It might be like, I don't know what the conditions are, but at most, I mean, the other effects doesn't really matter, and fusing with this card is just, it's never going to come up, actually. Celine, It's not generic enough, but still very good. It's really good if you have something like Effect Veiler, so like you can go Christian Holofibrax, summon the Effect Veiler, link up into Celine, and then you have 3 spells in graveyard, bring back the Veiler, and then go up into Access Code. But besides that, you're only really playing this in something like Altergeist, and then maybe a deck that uses Christian Holofibrax. But for the most part, this card is only going to be really used in something like Endymion. But definitely very solid to link climb into Access Code. Just like one of the best link monsters in the game currently. Geonator Transverser. This card is very good, not only for punishing players for not playing around it, but it also gives protection for your monsters. Maybe you want to protect a Zodiac Dryden, or you want to protect a Zeus, or an Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, whatever the case may be. Giving protection to not only that monster, but this card is just very good. It's hard for a lot of these control decks to kind of like out the boss monster that you're protecting, as well as this card. So definitely a very solid card. But for the most part, if you're not playing around it, you're just gonna get punished by it. And if you are playing around it, it's just not gonna see play. But you always have the fear of having this card be played against you and you just auto losing because you played into something like Geonator Transverser. So definitely a very good card, definitely very solid. Millennium Master Trick, instant fusions at 1, so it's not really going to be seen play. It's only really seen play in something like Drytron right now. Another one is Bls Link. It's not really good right now, not only because we have like no decks that's really summoning level 7s or higher, besides something like Eldritch, but also like there's not really a high demand in, you know, boss monsters that have like really solid protection or indestructible monsters being like good in the format, unless there was like a big control format with like Striker, Altergeist, like Guru was the best deck, then this card would be very good. But otherwise, like, it gets outclassed by something like Dragoon. So it's definitely very solid, it's definitely very good for those matchups, but just not generic enough. Specific win conditions for something like Artifact Dagda being able to, you know, set Scythe and then, you know, pop the Scythe with something like Tornado Dragon, or, you know, if you're playing Fluffles, the Citadel Well, whatever it's called, or you have Christian Holofibrax to tag out into the TG Wonder Edition to pop it and then Scythe block your opponent out of the extra deck. I think this engine is very solid. It's just not really seeing much play because you'd rather make Auroradon, or you're probably not playing Holofibrax, so this card is kind of useless unless you have rank 4s. It's just not really, it's not the format for this card, basically. Ravenous Croc. I'm gonna say this card is, it's generically, I think I'm gonna say this card is not generic enough. Even though not like rank 4s, level 9s are on the rise. They're on the rise, but this card is just still not generic enough. But it's still good because it not only gives you a lot of, you know, draw, in the sense that you can draw cards equal to the number of non-tuners, I believe, and then it does give you a pop on the field. So this card is very solid. It's just not generic enough, and it's only really seen play in something like Auroradon decks, or in something like Virtual Worlds that can make rank 9s, but it's mainly to go into something like PFD. So definitely a very solid card, just not generic enough. Zeus is one of the best cards in this format. Zeus is a powerhouse of a card, and if you get this dropped on you, you're probably just losing. Especially when this card has like 6 materials. This card is just very insane. Baguska, it's outclassed. It's not that good. I mean, it's decent against decks that don't really link summon, but against the decks that do link summon or do have something like Cerberus or something like that, like, Baguska is really not doing anything like that. And as well as, you know, the protection effect is decent to go up into Zeus. Really want that to happen, but for the most part, like Baguska, you're not really going to be making this. You're probably going to be making Dweller or Tornado Dragon instead, that are just generically better and just like very good against a lot of matchups. Shen, same thing with something like Ravenous Croc. It's just not generic enough, but still very good. You're seeing this in like outside of something like Virtual World, You're seeing this in, you know, many different decks that can just synchro summon. I can't really think of something off the top of my head, but synchro summoning is just way easier with something like Holofibrax, and just like this card is definitely a very solid card, not only being like a recurring boss monster on the field, but being able to have that kind of semi macrocosmos effect is just really solid, and it has solid attack as well. Also, this card is really good, but just not good enough. I'm gonna put this in like, it's generic, but I'm gonna put it like right here. It's like a really good card for against some like virtual worlds that do have earth monsters, or any deck that has earth monsters in their deck. It's just really good to summon that card and then, you know, Link climb into something like Access Code, which is fairly good. You're only really gonna see this in stuff like Zephyra. You might see this in virtual world as well. I mean, like, it's just really not, I don't know what to say about this card. It's honestly just like, it's really format dependent, but it's still really good, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna leave it here, but it's only really good for like earth decks and decks that can summon earth. So really solid card. I just don't know what categories, but it doesn't really fit into any of these categories. It's like kind of good, but it's very specific. Maybe I should put it down here, but I feel like specific win condition, something like Dagda. So yeah. Next up is the new Link 5. I think it's something goddess on the oh, I don't know. I don't know what this card is called, but it's very good. It's generically good and great. I'm gonna put this more towards the generically good but not quite great, because it's only really good in these Link climb decks like Prank Kids that go into Access Code. So this is like very easy to make. It's good in any deck that can make Access Code that is just really solid. But for the most part, it's just not generic enough, because as I said before, Eldritch doesn't really Link climb, Zodiac doesn't Link climb, Virtual Worlds don't Link climb, Drytron don't really Link climb that much. They might go into Appaloosa, but like this, I don't think they're gonna really make this. But it is an option for something like Drytron. But for the most part, this card is very solid, just not quite generic or enough, and just like it's just too much to Link climb into. Break Sword, it's generic but not generic enough. There's a lot of you know, level 3 monsters in the format. We have PKs, we have Burning Abyss, we have Virtual World, we have many other different, you know, level 3 monsters in the format, but for the most part, it's just not generic enough, and it's just not quite up there with the greats like Zeus and Dragoon and Holofibrax and, you know, Dryad and stuff like that. It's just not as strong as those cards. Appaloosa, definitely an insanely great and generic card. Very solid for negating any monster effects, which is just really good. Also having the protection with something like IP Masquerade is very good. So Appaloosa, definitely a very solid card. It's not seeing as much play because something like Virtual Worlds don't really XYZ summon, or, you know, Link summon. Virtual Worlds don't really Link summon, and Eldritch don't really Link summon, but it's still like so good as a card that it's just generically great as a card. Beatrice, definitely seeing a rise in play in something like Virtual World, but also seeing play in something BA. It's a very good card, being able to send like the Mischief, I don't know, with Mischief of the Gnomes or whatever it's called, being able to send the Crescendo, being able to send a Farfa, being able to send any card from your deck to the graveyard is just very solid as a generic XYZ monster, and it's probably going to see more play if we see more level 6 monsters in the format, but for the most part it's just not quite generic enough. Cross Sheep, I think Cross Sheep is very generically good, but it's only specific to fusion decks and ritual decks. I feel like if you're not playing ritual decks or, you know, fusion decks, you're probably not going to play Cross Sheep. It's generically good, but it's super specific because you're only playing this in something like Megaliths or Shaddolls. That's really it. Or like Fluffles if you really want to count that. So definitely a very strong card, but it's just not the format for type of card. The Lyrilless, I'm not gonna try to say the name. I don't remember, but it's just the Lyrilless XYZ that gives it protection. It's very good. It's very solid. It's only really for Zeus. But it's definitely still a very good card. Being able to, poke for damage is also really good in time. If that was a thing, really still. I guess in like remote duels is kind of a thing, but for the most part, you're just climbing up into Zeus. S0, it's just insanely generically good, especially with the Zexal cards coming out in Lightning Storm. Is going to be way, way better, but for the most part, you're only making this in Numeron decks, and all you really have to do is play Numeron cards, and it just generically just really, really solid as a card. Abyss Dweller, I would say is generically good, but not generic enough. Like, we don't see many, level 4 monsters in the deck. Like, maybe like Prank Kids, like Adamanticipators, Zodiac somewhat, I guess, but you're not gonna be making Dweller. You might as well just make Zeus at that point. It's just not the format for something like Dweller, to where you have so many like, rank 4s in the format or level 4 monsters in the format. So like Zeus or, yeah, Zeus is better, but Dweller is still really great for a lot of these graveyard decks like Drytron, Eldritch, Virtual World. Like, this card is just very, very solid. Lin Kuribo, I think this card is very, very, very good. It's generically great. It's good. This caused a lot of different cards to get banned. Like, this card is just really, really good. People really underestimate the power of Lin Kuribo. It's just really good. It's not as powerful as something like Zeus or Apollousa or, Zexal, but generically speaking, this card is just very, very, very good. Especially in something like Drytron, where you want to get the Drytrons in the graveyard. Or if you're link climbing, you can, go into Lin Kuribo, then summon that monster back from the graveyard. It's just really, really generically good as a card. It doesn't necessarily have to be like this insane boss monster to be insanely good and great. It's just like a really solid card for many different combos, and that's why it's a great card. Tornado Dragon, same thing with something like Dweller. It's really good. It kind of gets outclassed, so it probably should be in this category, but we're seeing a lot of Tornado Dragon in something like Dinosaurs that can make a lot of, rank 4 monsters, but for the most part, it's kind of getting outclassed by something like Phoenix, and there's not many, level 4 monsters in the format. Saryuja gets outclassed by Apollousa. There's nothing more to say. It's only really seeing play in like Dragon Link, so that's pretty much it. Cherubini, I say this is more for a specific win condition. Maybe you're just going for level 3 spam or playing Burning Abyss. It's only specifically for those level 3 type decks, and it's really good for those. But besides that, it's just not really seeing play outside of that. I sold another specific win condition. If your win condition is like I sold into Armageddon Knight, into Christian Holofibrax, into Auroradon, yeah, that's your win condition. I feel like Solde is definitely a very, very strong card. Same thing with something like Cherubini, but it's only for those specific type decks, if that makes sense. Zodiac Trident, definitely an insanely great and generic card. You don't even have to really play Zodiacs or just play like a Zodiac deck. You can like splash like a couple of Zodiac monsters in your deck. Make Borobo, make Trident, make Zeus, or if you really, really want to, you can play like Chakanine and like Trident to make, Trident and Zeus. So that is really solid for something like Trident as well. So Trident is just really good. Generic pop card, climbs up into Zeus. There's nothing really more to say about this card. This card is just really Secure Gardener. It's only specifically good in something like an Alistair deck or Dinosaurs. So it's really good for that, for getting Lin Kuribo in the grave, or getting Almirage in the grave for something like Alistair. So definitely a very solid card for those type of decks, but it's only really used in those specific decks. Anima, definitely an insanely good card going second, especially if your opponent doesn't play around Anima. You just steal their monster. GG easy. Also really good for getting the Drytrons in the graveyard, as I said before. Getting any, level 1 monster in the grave. There's so many really good level 1 monsters that are really good in the graveyard. Stuff like the Drytron monsters, before we had like Glow Up and stuff like that. So definitely a very, very generically good card. There's a lot of level 1s in the format. More in the Rogue tier. Like in the top tier, there's only really Drytron, but definitely the Rogue tier, there's definitely way more level 1 monsters that people play. But it's still a very generically solid good card, and it's definitely very good. Link Spider, it's like only for, I'd say it's generically good because you're not only using this in something like Eldritch that wants to get their trap monsters in the graveyard, but it's also good against something like dinosaurs to where you want to get rid of their tokens. It's also really good for getting rid of your tokens so you can climb up into something like Access Code, Roll Sword. So this card is just the same thing as Lin Kuribo. It's generically good. It's not like a powerhouse, but it's still very solid as a Link 1. Borosword Savage Dragon, this card is generically good, but not great enough. As we see, like Crystal Holofibrax or Rodon combos are kind of on the decline, even though they're still kind of in the format. But I mean, it's still a very solid card. It negates a card. You're gonna see this in something like Adamanticators. You're still gonna see this in Soul decks. You're still gonna see this in any deck that can make a level 8 synchro. So definitely very solid. Just not seeing as much play as it was before, when we had like Adamanticators and Dragon Link and Infernobles in the format dominating. Wine is kinda in the same category as something like Asa. It's generically good because we have stuff like Virtual Worlds that have wind monsters and earth monsters, and being able to summon those monsters onto your side of the field to link climb is just very, very solid. But for the most part, it's only for those specific type of matchups. So definitely a very solid card for link climbing, just really specific. It probably should be in this category, but I feel like these cards are just way different. A Striker Dragon, definitely for a specific win condition. Maybe if you're playing something like the Rocket Engine, you probably just want to go into your Ruler or a Savage or something like that, or any level 8 Synchro. Definitely a very solid card in something like Dragon Link. But for the most part, this is only going to be used in something like Dragon Link or Dragon Maids or any Dragon deck. Maybe in a Pendulum deck that's using Dark Worm. So definitely a very solid card, but it's only for those specific win conditions. Union Carrier, another solidly good card. I'm gonna put this in insanely generic and great. You're seeing this in Drytron, you're seeing this in ABCs, you're probably gonna see it in many other different decks to do crazy stuff. But definitely a very, very solid card. It has future potential. It has, it's really good right now for something like Drytron to equip Dawn Knight, or for ABC to equip a piece. So definitely a very solid card. Definitely going to see play in the future. So that is why it's in the insanely great and generic category. Some more definitely for those specific win conditions. You're seeing this in something like Bird Up or Tri Brigade, mishmash of Wing Beasts or that type of deck. Like, this card is definitely very solid. It's also really good in something like Dinosaurs that can make Reproducus and then change it to Wing Beasts and then climb into something like some more. But that is also good for something like this card, and I think it's just a very solid win condition. Just like something like Dagda that just locks you into special summoning monsters that can't special summon at all. So definitely a very solid engine. Verte, generically good and great. You're gonna see this in a lot of different decks. Phantom Knights, Eldritch, like you can generically put this in anything. It's just really, really good. Cyber Dragons that can fusion summon as well. You'll probably play this in like Praying Caves if you really wanted to. Card is just generically great. It's pretty much like the go-to card for fusion decks. Over something like Cross Sheep, because Cross Sheep you kind of have to already summon those type of monsters, but like with Verte you could just like use this to fuse into those fusion monsters. Winda, It's great, but not generic enough. You're only really gonna see this in Shaddoll decks or Dogmatica decks, and for those decks, it's a really good card, but it's just not quite generic enough to be like in the insanely great and generic category. Dragoon, like there's nothing really to say. Like this is one of the best cards in the format, along with something like Zeus and Zexal and Dryden. Like these cards are just really, I wouldn't consider Dryden to be up there, but Apollos is definitely up there with, you know, the greats, the great boss mod. Aurodon, another card that's generic. I'd say this is more of a specific win condition. If your deck is based off of, you know, Holofibrax, you're probably gonna play this and then go into, you know, synchro plays, but for the most part it's just for those specific win conditions. Holofibrax, generically good, it's generically solid card. It's just not seeing play because there's not many link climbing decks in the format, as I said before many times in this video. Gossip Shadow, another really good generic level 3 monsters, as we see before. There's a lot of different, you know, rank 3 decks in the format, like Virtual World, Phantom Knights, PKs. You can kind of make this in a lot of different decks that aren't those other decks, but for the most part, generically good. Is really good for stopping hand traps. You know, just a really solid rank 3 monster. The Tis, generically good, just not great enough. I'd say this is more of like, it's not generic enough, but it's still pretty good. You're only really playing this in Dogmatica decks. You could also play this in like Drytron if you're playing extra Foolish Barrier Goods, so I guess, but for the most part, you're only playing this in Dogmatica decks. Gravity Controller, it's not generic enough. You're only really summoning this in like Zephyra and Shaddolls to kind of, you know, get those monsters off the board. So definitely a very solid card. It is really good for that protection, and also being able to bounce cards is really good. So definitely very solid. VFD, this card is like above, like this is like in tier 0 category. Like this card is just like defining the format. This card is very insane. Probably should get banned. It's probably going to get banned on this next ban list. I think it's just like, there's nothing really more to say about this card. Access Code. Access Code is one of the best OTK cards out there. Probably the best OTK card in the format. And it pretty much, you know, overrid the Borosword Dragon that used to be like prominent in the format. People used to say Borosword needed to be banned. And like Access Code is like 100 times better than this card, because you not only get that OTK potential, but you get to pop multiple cards on the field. So Access Code is just very good. Then Phoenix is another like really generic card. I'd say this is more of like not great enough because a lot of decks just don't make link monsters. But I want to kind of put it in like the generically great cards. It's just like really good. Even if it's just like there's no decks to really, I guess like there's decks really link summoning, but like Virtuals don't link summon, Zodiacs don't link summon, so like that's like half of the format that just doesn't link summon. The other half is like Drytron that does link summon, and then like Dragon Link, I guess you can go into Phoenix, but like other than that, like I just feel like Phoenix is just generically great. I don't care how many people are playing this card. It's just like a generically good card in general. Fortune Dune, another like rank 3 that's only specifically good in like those rank 3 decks. So definitely very solid, but it's only really good for Zeus, which is why all these cards are in here. So this is for Zeus, this is for Zeus, and like these three cards are only for Zeus. And I guess you could put Guska up here as well. That's like only good for Zeus. But for the most part, yeah, that's all they're good for. Lambda, I'm gonna say this is generically good, but not quite great. There's a lot of Cypher and Gear Gamma in the format, so Lambda is just like a go-to card if you want to have your Gamma to be live. So that's just really good. Omega, same thing. If you really want something to go into with your Omega or with your Gamma in your driver, you can make Omega, so that's really good. Just a very generic, you know, XYZ, not XYZ. Very good level 8 monster you can make with Gamma and driver. Next up, Almirage. It's generically good, but not great enough. I mean, for the decks that need it, like to get those monsters in the graveyard, it's really good. But otherwise, you're just not really playing it in your deck. It's just like a very generic card for those type of engines. I guess you could put this in like, there's no really good category it's in. Rusty is for a specific win condition. If your deck summons a lot of darks, you're probably gonna play this. You're seeing this in PK, you're seeing this in Orcas, you're seeing this in like maybe Burning Abyss, but for the most part, Rusty is just really good for those type of decks. Herald, it's only really good for those Auroradon decks. I put this more than generic. It's not generic enough, but it's still pretty good category because it's a really solid card. You're only really seeing this in something like Auroradon decks. Maybe if you're playing Drytrons and you're playing extra Foolish Barrel Goods, this card is just generically good. Cerberus, definitely a very solid card. Punishes people for putting Zeus in the main monster zone or putting any extra deck monster in the main monster zone. So Cerberus is definitely very solid. Unicorn, definitely like an insanely good and generic card to be able to climb up into access code. Just really good. Also being able to spin a card back into the extra deck or the main deck, so that's really good. And then Totally Awesome, it's good but just not generic enough. It's only really used in water decks, so if your deck doesn't really have water monsters, you're probably not making it. The only decks that really make Toad is like Prank Kids, Marmels, and like I guess like rank 4 water spam. I guess Paleos too make this card. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think about this list, and you know, if I missed any other generic extra deck monsters. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Rambled on long enough. I'm out of breath. See you guys later. Peace.